the disappearance of the farmer. By the late 202s, farmland speculation had erased the line between investment and inheritance. The people who once defined the countryside were no longer its owners. Rural maps still showed family names, but the deeds belonged to holding companies with addresses in Delaware or Singapore. On paper, America was still an agricultural power. In reality, its farmers were vanishing. The change wasn't sudden. It happened every time someone like Mark Davis watched a corporate bidder outspend a family that had worked its soil for generations. At first, those stories sounded isolated, bad luck, or poor timing. But patterns emerged. County assessor records showed the same shell companies buying dozens of neighboring parcels, each sale driving up the next. Families who had survived droughts, floods, and fluctuating commodity prices couldn't survive Wall Street. Within a decade, independent farmers became tenants on the same fields that bore their last names. Across Iowa, Kansas, and the Delta, for lease signs replaced mailboxes. Corporate landlords offered short-term leases with yield benchmarks and digital reporting requirements. Farmers became contract workers managing assets they didn't own. They paid rent indexed to inflation, absorbing risk without building equity. Many compared it to the tenant systems their grandparents escaped a century ago. The irony wasn't lost on them. One couple in Illinois, Diane and Harold Lewis, had farmed 800 acres their grandparents carved from prairie over a century ago. When fertilizer costs soared and the bank refused another loan, they sold 600 acres to a pension fund subsidiary. The contract let them stay on as tenants, guaranteeing operational continuity. 2 years later, the new owner raised rent 20%. Diane said, "We harvest for someone else now." It feels like sharecropping with better paperwork. That paperwork hides a cruel statistic. By the end of the decade, fewer than 2% of Americans directly worked in agriculture, and most no longer owned the ground they tilled. Census data described operator decline, a sterile phrase concealing human loss. Young people left because they couldn't afford land. Older farmers sold out because they couldn't retire otherwise. Each sale hollowed another community. Rural towns shrank not from disaster, but from mathematics. When ownership vanished, so did agency. Local banks closed after losing borrowers. Farm supply stores turned into distribution hubs for national chains. Schools consolidated as families moved to cities. In places like western Nebraska, whole townships reverted to prairie because no one lived there anymore. Satellite images showed green rectangles of irrigated megafarms surrounded by empty roads. The countryside looked productive from above, desolate on the ground. Sociologists call it ownership displacement. To residents, it feels simpler, being erased. One farmer in Oklahoma told a reporter, "My granddad fought to keep this place during the Dust Bowl. He'd never believe I lost it to investors who've never seen dust." What used to be generational continuity became a one-generation lease cycle. Each renewal felt like a reprieve instead of a right. The collapse isn't just economic, it's psychological. Farming once meant autonomy, pride, and a direct connection between effort and result. Now, performance metrics determine worth. Corporate landlords collect weekly drone data, showing plant health and moisture. If yields fall below modeled targets, tenants risk losing contracts. For farmers, the pressure resembles warehouse fulfillment quotas more than seasons of growth. The job title remains the same, the meaning doesn't. Work that once followed nature's rhythm now follows spreadsheets. Leases start on fiscal years, not planting calendars. Investors publish quarterly updates comparing portfolio yield to commodity benchmarks. Somewhere inside those reports are human lives reduced to line items. Underperformance in Midwest leases due to weather variability. That sentence might represent a family's entire livelihood. Debt deepens the trap. To stay competitive, tenant farmers lease more acres or invest in precision equipment financed through the same banks partnering with agribusiness landlords. Miss one payment, and the repossessed combine goes straight to the company store, resold or leased again. Farmer debt swells while ownership equity disappears, a reversal of the model that sustained rural economies for a century. The generational chain breaks here. Fewer children inherit farms because there are no farms left to inherit. College agriculture programs report enrollment declines as students pivot to agribusiness management instead of production. The identity of farmer shifts from doer to overseer. In some regions, corporations advertise openings for farm operators, the same way factories list machine technicians. for the communities around them, that shift tears more than nostalgia. Churches close, co-ops dissolve, and local governance weakens. When fewer residents own land, fewer pay property taxes directly. Voting power flows to absentee owners represented by attorneys rather than neighbors. Policy once shaped by farmers now answers to investors who measure success in yield per share. Rural democracy withers alongside ownership. At the same time, media narratives celebrate innovation. Drone footage of vast, automated fields runs in business magazines under headlines about efficiency and progress. To someone in a city apartment, it looks like advancement. To those displaced, it looks like erasure turned into spectacle. Progress sounds brighter when you're not the cost. Some farmers resist through cooperatives that pool resources to purchase land collectively. Others turn to regenerative methods outside traditional finance, relying on community-supported agriculture or local investors. These efforts inspire, but they operate inside a tilted system. Competing with billion-dollar funds using public subsidies and tax advantages is like trying to outbid gravity. The scale difference alone keeps most resistance symbolic. Still, within that symbolism lies meaning. In Missouri, a group of evicted farmers held onto 10 acres and built a shared greenhouse, selling produce directly to nearby towns. Their leader, an older farmer named Clara Jensen, told a local paper, "We lost our farms, not our hands." Stories like hers echo faintly against the larger trend, reminders that culture persists even when property fades. Yet the statistical tide moves one way. Larger enterprises swallow the remainder, rebranding rural zones as agricultural production districts. Workers receive contracts tying wages to yield performance, not ownership. Corporate recruiters call them crop technicians. Their supervisors review satellite metrics from regional offices hundreds of miles away. Farming becomes shift work managed by algorithmic schedules and remote analytics dashboards. As labor contracts replace family ownership, wages stagnate. Benefits vanish because workers are classified as seasonal contractors. Immigration policies fill the gap with temporary foreign labor programs. Town accents change, communities fragment. The United States still produces enormous quantities of food, but fewer citizens have any stake in producing it. The country that once bragged, "We feed the world," now leases the right to feed itself. For remaining independent farmers, the isolation grows. They watch neighbors sell out or age out while corporate trucks haul uniform harvests from leased fields. When they gather at the local diner, and there are fewer diners left, the talk turns to survival rather than legacy. One man sighs, "We used to argue about weather. Now we argue about algorithms." The laughter that follows carries resignation. This isn't a nostalgic tragedy, it's a systemic design. The financialization of land naturally removes those who can't match institutional capital. Just as small shopkeepers disappeared when retail corporatized, small farmers fade when food becomes finance. The market rewards concentration, not stewardship. And as land consolidates, so does narrative control. Reports describe farmers as inefficient legacy operators, reframing displacement as modernization. The psychological cost ripples beyond the countryside. Urban consumers lose connection to food origins, assuming abundance will persist regardless of who grows it. That detachment allows policy complacency. Few realize that when farmers vanish, food resilience goes with them. Lacking local knowledge and adaptive diversity, industrial systems become brittle, optimized for profit, vulnerable to shock. Meanwhile, investment firms celebrate efficiency gains in their quarterly letters. Charts show reduced labor costs and higher average output per acre. Those numbers look like progress until you ask who used to earn that income. Beneath the profits lies a population quietly erased. People whose names no longer appear on deeds, whose stories no longer fit the metrics of success. What emerges is a tenant society in rural form. A landscape owned by corporations, worked by contractors, overseen by algorithms. Independence turns into gig work under open skies. For many, farming still feels like a calling, but answering that call now requires permission from a landlord hiding behind a limited liability shell. Standing on a rented field at dusk, a farmer pauses as automatic sprinklers click on around him. The water arcs over soil his family once owned. The machinery hums on schedule. Satellites watch from above. He wipes his hands, knowing the sensors measure moisture better than he can. Yet none of those systems know him. In tomorrow's reports, his effort will be summarized as data, efficient, compliant, replaceable. Behind him, the horizon glows with distant towers marking the next logistics hub built on former farmland. Ahead, the rows stretch. Flawlessly straight, every line perfect, every human out of frame. The efficiency illusion. By the time investors dominated the countryside, a new word became their shield: efficiency. In reports, conferences, and political speeches, it justified everything: consolidation, automation, even the disappearance of farmers. Efficiency meant progress, and progress was always good. But on the ground, it masked a different truth: that financial power had rebranded control as innovation. Listen to how they talk about it. Agribusiness executives call themselves stewards of productivity. Private equity managers describe farmland portfolios as optimized ecosystems. In place of farmers, they say operators. In place of communities, they say scalable networks. Every term flattens the human texture of agriculture into measurable inputs and outputs. When questioned about rural decline, they smile and reply that modernization always disrupts. We're feeding more people with fewer resources, they argue, as if efficiency alone could erase inequality. At first glance, the numbers even seem to agree. Acreage yields climb. Labor hours drop. Output per worker hits record highs. Satellites monitor fields every day. Sensors adjust irrigation by the minute. Yet total food affordability slips, soil health deteriorates, and rural poverty deepens. The paradox is plain. The more efficient the system becomes, the less it nourishes the people within it. Executives insist this is temporary, a transition phase. They point to technology as salvation. Drones, robotics, and AI should reduce waste and increase yield. Ag-tech startups pitch themselves as saviors solving hunger with code. Venture funds swarm the sector, promising tools that will democratize farming data. But the ownership of those tools traces back to the same capital groups controlling the land. The new machines don't empower farmers, they entrench dependence. Imagine a family leasing land from an investment trust. Their contract requires adoption of specific software to monitor soil and moisture. That software is licensed by a subsidiary of the same fund. Data from the farm is uploaded daily, analyzed remotely, and used to adjust next season's rent based on predicted yield. The tenant pays 3 times: once to rent the land, once for the tech required to run it, and once through data that improves the landlord's next forecast. Efficiency becomes surveillance disguised as innovation. Agritech firms champion precision agriculture, claiming it prevents overuse of water and fertilizer. In practice, those sensors help enforce production quotas and flag underperforming leases. The more precisely they measure, the tighter control investors exert. What began as a tool to save resources becomes infrastructure for compliance. A farmer in Kansas described it simply: the computer thinks faster, but for who? Meanwhile, PR campaigns flood social media with pastoral imagery. Hands sifting soil, bright green leaves, slogans about feeding the world sustainably. Corporations sponsor documentaries showing solar-powered tractors and automated greenhouses. The message is clear: high-tech efficiency equals moral virtue. Few viewers realize those tractors operate on land owned by pension consortia in New York or Abu Dhabi. Sustainability sells well when dissociated from ownership. Regulatory agencies echo the same language. Policy papers celebrate economies of scale and technological integration. Legislators cite industry studies, often funded by the very corporations they oversee, that frame consolidation as necessary for global food security. Lobbyists present graphs proving large farms emit less CO2 per unit of food. Missing from those graphs are the emissions from displaced small farms, redundant transport networks, and increased dependence on synthetic fertilizer. The story of carbon efficiency hides the cost of ecological exhaustion. In truth, efficiency doesn't mean doing more with less. It means converting unpredictability into consistent revenue. Nature's irregularities, rainfall, pests, soil regeneration, don't suit quarterly reports. Technology smooths those fluctuations long enough for investors to lock in gains, even if ecosystems strain in the process. When yields level off or climate stress disrupts forecasts, firms relocate capital, not crops. The land left behind bears the real inefficiency: depleted soil and empty towns. Through clever language, losses become virtues. When corporate landlords cut jobs, they call it automated optimization. When local supply chains collapse, they label it logistical consolidation. Even humanitarian initiatives mirror the narrative. Philanthropic foundations fund tech pilots that claim to empower smallholders overseas while investing in global farmland funds at home. The optics harmonize. One hand donates, the other speculates. Inside these dynamics lies regulatory capture. Many agricultural advisors at federal agencies cycle directly into private sector consultancies. Policy drafts for precision farming incentives often draw from corporate white papers. Subcommittee hearings feature testimony by executives whose companies receive the very subsidies under discussion. The revolving door spins smoothly because efficiency provides cover. What bureaucrat dares oppose progress? For investors, this alignment is perfect. Governments subsidize the very systems that guarantee corporate returns. Grants for water-saving technology funnel into hardware purchases managed by the same agritech giants leasing the fields. Carbon credit markets reward companies for using digital monitoring, data they already collect. Efficiency morphs into a revenue stream layered atop agriculture, turning ecological crisis into a new portfolio category. Consider how analysts describe drought. Where farmers see threat, investors see price opportunity. Reports praise adaptive monetization of climate volatility. In other words, as the planet warms, the assets tied to resource scarcity become more profitable. The market's moral compass flips. The worse the outlook for the environment, the stronger the case for owning its remnants. Profit justifies every predicted disaster as potential yield growth. Inside boardrooms, discussions sound like corporate strategy sessions, not agricultural planning. A presentation slide might read, "Leveraging climate risk into alpha generation." Another highlights reduced labor exposure via robotics deployment. Beneath the jargon lies simple arithmetic. Extract more, spend less, externalize cost. Efficiency provides the moral sheen that turns exploitation into innovation. Yet cracks appear. Soil depletion across heavily financialized farmland is accelerating. Research from Midwestern universities shows nutrient loss rising even as profits climb. Monoculture cycles shorten fallow periods, burning out organic matter. But rather than restore, investors rotate capital to new regions, leaving behind what agronomists call stranded land, fields that can't recover without years of rest. They're the agricultural equivalent of ghost factories. In California, large orchards now rely on predictive models to schedule harvests. Algorithms decide water timing, fertilizer batches, even labor hours. Workers receive text alerts directing them to coordinates. When a model underpredicts yield, fruit rots. When it overpredicts, overtime spikes. Either way, human reasoning has vanished from the loop. "We used to read the trees," one foreman said. "Now we read the app." Productivity metrics rise, but job satisfaction and skill retention collapse. Efficiency has no memory. The public rarely hears these details because corporate communication reframes every outcome as progress. Press releases announce supply chain modernization, without mentioning the closed cooperatives. Reports highlight carbon-neutral facilities, while exporting emissions to contracted transport fleets abroad. Every indicator of social loss transforms into a symbol of environmental leadership. Language launders consequence. The psychological toll stretches further. Farmers and workers measure their worth against machines that never sleep. When sensors declare underperformance, self-doubt replaces pride. Depression and suicide rates in agricultural communities, already high, climb further. Yet the discourse remains fixed on innovation metrics: drone coverage, sensor density, input reductions. Efficiency speaks only in percentages, never in people. Even consumers are enlisted in the narrative. Marketing tells shoppers that higher prices reflect the cost of sustainable production. Labels featuring buzzwords, regenerative, eco-smart, data-driven, reassure buyers that moral eating simply means paying more. The premium flows back through corporate channels to investors measuring brand loyalty as another efficiency ratio. Ethical consumption becomes another layer of monetization. There's a philosophical sleight of hand here. Efficiency once meant balance, doing enough with care for what remains. Now it means eliminating everything that slows capital circulation: rest, diversity, deliberation. In that sense, the system achieves exactly what it intends: perfect conversion of living ecosystems into predictable earnings. It's not broken, it's precise. But precision breeds fragility. A field optimized to millimeter precision tolerates no error. When climate shocks hit, algorithms lack improvisation. When energy costs surge, automated irrigation halts. Communities that once shared risks collectively now wait for corporate emergency plans that prioritize asset preservation over livelihoods. The efficiency that promised resilience delivers rigidity instead. This is the illusion's final form, a future where progress is measured not in nourishment or security, but in throughput speed. Investors, aided by policymakers and technologists, define success as minimizing the distance between nature and profit. Every drop of water, every acre of land, every human gesture becomes a data point in a global engine engineered to run without pause. Efficiency was supposed to feed us better. Instead, it feeds the system that profits from pretending it can. The coming flashpoint. By the early 203s, the map of global agriculture looks nothing like it did a generation ago. Ownership has converged into fewer and more powerful hands. Lines once drawn between financial centers and farm regions have blurred into a single network where capital moves faster than rain. The system works until it doesn't. Beneath the calm of steady returns, pressure is building. Somewhere in that pressure lies the next breaking point. You can already see the warning signs in the soil. Across the U.S. Midwest, soil loss averages 5 tons per acre each year, 10 times faster than nature replaces it. Decades of continuous planting, combined with heavy mechanization, have shaved the land into exhaustion. Analysts describe it clinically as organic matter depletion. But to farmers who still live nearby, it feels like watching the land die of thirst. Where prairie grasses once held moisture, wind now blows thin layers of topsoil into the next county. It's not climate alone, it's efficiency's aftershock. The ecological strain echoes overseas. In parts of Brazil, vast soy plantations financed by foreign funds push into rainforest buffer zones, displacing thousands of smallholders. In sub-Saharan Africa, leasing programs branded as agricultural modernization have transferred millions of acres from local communities to multinational consortia. Governments celebrate the deals as development, yet the food produced often heads straight to export markets or biofuel production. The cycle repeats, profit leaves, depletion stays. Water scarcity reinforces the spiral. The western United States remains locked in drought. In regions like California's Central Valley and Arizona's basins, aquifers sink deeper as investors extract water faster than any natural recharge can replace. The logic is perfectly rational on paper: maximize yield while rights exist, but ecologically suicidal. Satellite data shows entire valleys sinking from subsidence. Once the ground caves, so do the surrounding infrastructures, canals, roads, wells. Repair costs fall on taxpayers, not portfolio holders. It's the ultimate privatization of risk. Meanwhile, global demand for food keeps rising. 10 billion mouths projected by mid-century create an irresistible narrative for continued expansion. Policymakers and investors alike frame every environmental concession as unavoidable sacrifice to feed the world. Yet hunger grows too. The United Nations reports that more than 700 million people face chronic undernourishment even as agribusiness profits reach record highs. The paradox is structural. Food scarcity generates higher margins than abundance. For a system tuned to maximize return, crisis isn't an error, it's performance. In this landscape, farmland doubles as geopolitical leverage. Nations once importing grain now seek control of production abroad. China, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia lease or buy land across Africa and South America, ensuring food imports in case of drought at home. Western pension funds follow suit, diversifying sovereign exposure through overseas acreage.